Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome back to Next Level Ed Leadership Interview Prep. Before we get to today's research observation, I just wanted to let you know that we have a new resource. It is a comprehensive list of the more than 170 questions and scenarios from superintendent interviews. These are pulled right from our case studies. It also contains the research based response strategies to help you prepare for your interview. It's completely free. Just go to nextleveled.com. I'm sorry, nextleveledleadership.com and go to the resource page, scroll down, and you'll find it there. All right, let's get into today's research. Have you ever finished answering a superintendent interview question or practice and felt confident about how you were going to either respond to a certain question or how you did respond because you know that you will clearly explain or have explained the decision that you made? You've described the challenge, you explained what you decided, you talked about the different results that came from those decisions, and you walked out thinking, I answered that one well. That's exactly what many candidates experience. They believe the board is evaluating whether they made a good decision. But what if that isn't what the board is evaluating? What if the board isn't trying to determine whether your decision was right, but whether they trust how you arrived at that decision? As we continued analyzing superintendent interviews, we noticed something else. Strong candidates consistently described executive decisions, but the responses that created the greatest executive confidence weren't simply describing the decision. They were revealing the thinking behind the decision. That observation led to today's research finding. Most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else. I'm Jonathan Royce. Through Executive Interview Intelligence, each episode explores the leadership signals, decision making patterns, and executive behaviors that influence superintendent hiring decisions so you can make your executive leadership visible before the board makes its hiring decision. Recognized as one of the top 10 K 12 podcasts on Podomatic, Executive Interview Intelligence is built on the analysis of real superintendent interviews to uncover the hidden executive evaluations taking place throughout the hiring process. At this point, we've analyzed more than 170 superintendent interview questions and candidate responses. We've broken them down into their component parts and created practical tools that save you time, reduce anxiety, and provide a systematic way to prepare for superintendent interviews. That way, you can focus on leveling up, accelerate your professional trajectory, and prepare for a future where you're leading a district and improving students' lives. This is Executive Interview Intelligence Research Observation number 85. A superintendent interview response doesn't become more executive because you describe a bigger problem's decision. We it becomes more executive because the board can understand why that decision became the best decision. The decision itself is only part of the story. Executive confidence is built when school boards can see the judgment that produced it. Let me show you what the research began to reveal. One school board asked every finalist the same question. What has been the most unpopular decision you've had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision? On the surface level, that sounds like a question about difficult leadership. But as we continued reviewing the case study, we realized that the board wasn't simply asking for a difficult story. They were evaluating the candidate's executive judgment. One finalist responded, cutting programs. Cutting staff is probably the most difficult because it's unsettling and makes everybody in the organization nervous. That's an honest response. The candidate recognizes the constraint, the budget realities, the declining enrollment, limited resources, but then we notice something interesting happening. The response quickly shifted towards implementation, about how they were maintaining enrollment, building community support, offering opportunities. Those are important leadership actions. But one question still remained. How did the candidate decide what to cut and why? That's the executive decision the board is trying to evaluate, not simply that difficult decisions were made. Because as a superintendent, you're going to be making difficult decisions all the time. So, how are those decisions reached? That response doesn't need a different example. It just needs an upgrade. A different case study revealed the same pattern through a completely different question. The committee asked, describe a time when you wish you'd been more collaborative with others. What did you do and what did you learn? This candidate explained, I used to do budgeting by myself. Then continued, I put everybody's request on the board, everybody saw what the requests were, and then at the end of the response, the more you can be transparent, the more you can pull people in, the less questions they have. So now we're beginning to see something different. The decision itself wasn't changing the budget process. The executive decision was choosing transparency over efficiency. The candidate recognized that better decisions required greater ownership. That's executive judgment. The board isn't simply learning what changed, they're beginning to understand why the change became necessary. That decision creates executive confidence because the reasoning behind it becomes visible. Then another superintendent interview caught my attention. In this one, the committee asked, what steps do you take to see an innovative idea go from a concept to reality? This was one finalist response. You got to have a champion for the idea. Then added, does this fit our strategic plan? And finally, we have enough money to do anything we want to do. We just can't do everything we want to do. That sentence right there changes the response because executive leaders don't evaluate ideas in isolation. They evaluate priorities. So we're talking about trade-offs and alignment, opportunity cost. So suddenly the board isn't just hearing someone who simply likes innovation. They're hearing someone who understands that every executive decision eliminates other possibilities. That's what executive leadership looks like when you are in the field and you want to make that clear while you're in the interviewee chair. Across these case studies, we kept seeing this pattern showing up. Candidates weren't losing executive confidence because they lacked experience. They weren't losing that confidence from the board because they made poor decisions. They were losing the school board's confidence in their executive decision making because the committee couldn't always see how those decisions were reached. The strongest finalists didn't simply announce the decision. They revealed the executive reasoning that made that decision inevitable from their perspective. And that's an important distinction here. School boards aren't simply evaluating whether you made a difficult decision. They're evaluating whether they trust the judgment that produced it. That's the second step of the upgrade formula, because once the board understands the constraint, the next thing that they need to understand is why this decision became the best decision. Today's research observation changes the way that we think about executive decisions during superintendent interviews. The goal isn't simply to convince the board that you made a good decision. It's to help them understand why that decision became the right decision at that moment in time. School boards rarely have enough information to determine whether your decision was objectively correct. What they can evaluate and what they're trying to evaluate is your judgment. Did you recognize the right problem? Did you gather the right information? Did you weigh those competing priorities? And then did you make a decision that reflected thoughtful executive leadership? That's what creates executive confidence. That's what creates their confidence in your executive decision making. As we continued analyzing superintendent interview case studies, we discovered something else. Candidates who consistently advanced didn't just explain what they decided, they helped the committee understand why they couldn't responsibly decide any other way. That's a different type of response, and it leaves a very different leadership impression. In our next episode, we'll continue building the upgrade formula by examining another piece of the decision chain that's often left out of otherwise strong responses. Because even after a committee understands the constraint and understands the decision, there's still another executive leadership signal they're looking for. If you're listening on your way to work or on the way back from work, when you get back to your computer or safely pull over, please visit analysis.next-level and leadershipinterviewprep.com. The link will be in the description. You can record one of your superintendent interview responses and discover whether your decision making is creating executive visibility before the board makes its hiring decision, because you already know what you're saying. The real question is, what is the board hearing? And this analysis will give you that immediate feedback. If you found today's research helpful, I'd appreciate it if you left a 5-star review that helps other educational leaders discover executive interview intelligence and supports the continued growth of this research. And until next time, remember, most superintendent candidates prepare for interview questions. School boards are evaluating something else.